Thank you all today for tuning in and watching our annual UANI Summit. I reflect back on the 13 years that UANI has been in existence and the 42 years that Iran has been a radical regime, had a radical regime. And when we started UANI in 2008, I remember one of the first discussions that we had was our name. And we talked about creating the American coalition against a nuclear Iran. And I was really worried because I said, who's the coalition? There's not a broad-based coalition. 13 years later, after several years of summits, diplomacy, and working with countries around the world, it strikes me that there truly is a much broader, true coalition in the face of the dangers of a nuclear-armed Iran. You have, of course, Israel. You have, of course, so many Americans. You have all the regional allies that are lining up and more vocal about the dangers of a nuclear Iran, obviously many times in coalition with our Israeli friends. So it's changed. There is a true coalition. But I bring it back to what's happening in these P5+1 negotiations. It's important for our diplomats that represent us from multiple countries in those negotiations with Iran to remember that the people that are most vulnerable to a nuclear armed Iran and Iran's mischief are its neighbors, Israel, and frankly, the United States as well. And that those diplomats should channel the concerns, the realities, and the thoughts of that coalition. And I worry that the nature of the P5+1 is anachronistic. It's anachronistic because it's European and American power sitting in salons in faraway lands deciding the fate of regions. There is nothing wrong with our great allies in Europe and certainly our diplomats here, but it's so important to include the important voices in the region that are directly threatened by Iran on a daily basis. Imagine if our own American domestic policy debate was decided in dark rooms hidden away from those that are most affected by our current debates. That was a period of time that happened years ago, and I think that there's a lot of voices in opposition to that type of policy making domestically. I think it's high time that we brought that sentiment to our international relations and make sure that the voices that are most concerned, most effective, have a seat at this table. Second, I feel that after 13 years of United Against Nuclear Iran, when we so carefully looked at all the concerns that people had about Iran, that some of the concerns and the voices have been lost by our own preoccupation with domestic politics and our own problems, both at home and abroad. So rarely do we talk about human rights. So rarely do we talk about Iran's treatment of its own people, of the LGBTQ community, its own people, suppression of freedom of expression, the vast minority groups that compose the Iranian people that are persecuted on a daily basis. So infrequently are those issues talked about, but they are incredibly important. We talked about it today in the hostage panel about how a policy of a country that was willing to use human pawns in its international negotiations continues apace to this day, 42 years later. I don't think we can lose sight of that. And I think it would be very much tunnel vision if our wonderful diplomats in the P5+1 did not factor these very important issues into the negotiations. And if there is going to be some sort of longer and stronger agreement, we must insist that those concerns are addressed at that table because they matter, they're important. It says who we are as much as it says who the Iranians are. So I truly hope that that we get to a place where our diplomats can revisit these very, very important issues that are really not talked about nearly as much anymore. And I hope in a small way, at least, the incredible voices that we've heard at the UANI Summit could contribute to that narrative. So in conclusion, and until next year, I want to thank our incredible team, the Linder team that helped organize this. We thank them. David Ibsen is our executive director. He is the man that makes all this work, and I congratulate him yet again. So congratulations, David. Claire Youngman, who did an incredible job organizing this event, and her team. Congratulations to all of you. I thank you. And to the incredible the moderators, the speakers, the panelists, thank you. Every time I participate in one of these conferences, I'm humbled by the people that I get to call my friends and the people I get to introduce and the people that are so strongly supportive of this cause. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you next year.